What is your sense of the interplay between what you speak about as the first miracle consciousness, the sense of being a separate self, that seems to be a mixture of the capacity for consciousness and thought and feeling together, what that sense of being a me, a self, an I, and that larger energy that opened up. What's your sense of, what can you say about the dissolution of that sense of being separate, that as it unfolded in your journey, those early days?
Well, I think, the truest thing is always to stay with your actual experience. And now I can look back and I can see that the strength of my mind, I wanted to understand, I wanted to be in control. That's the first miracle consciousness. That's the consciousness of me, what I often refer to these days as me world. That, in a sense, is much too small and feels as if it's being threatened with annihilation when it moves into that other consciousness. I think we move sometimes spontaneously and in a graceful way. Suddenly we're overwhelmed with love, suddenly we're just filled with unity. To me, that is an incomplete realization. After that level of opening, there comes the shadow, whatever's been repressed or buried in the consciousness that has to come forward and be integrated into that love. And that's, I think, then the formation of this me consciousness, this I consciousness, is achieved by burying so much, repressing so much, denying so much. We deny fear, we deny helplessness, we deny meaninglessness, we deny the full extent of our narcissistic desire to be God, to be the universe. Even though it's running around there in our subconscious, the me, the me, myself, and I, the self-important process, but we tend to deny it to some extent. But it comes forward with a vengeance. It comes forward and it says, understand this, integrate this, find a way to see this as an object, not as essence, not as self. And of course, to the extent there's identification with me, then you oscillate between desolation and dissolving and sense of loss of self. And then if you surrender deeply enough, you are once again reestablished in emptiness, fullness, and there is a sense of joy, a sense of unity, a sense of completeness. Not that you deserve it, but that is intrinsic to reality, and you are that. And then once again, consciousness starts to re-identify with its former construction of me or I. Once again, there is a sense of trying to put meaning into things and a sense of trying to control things. And once again, that puts us into conflict or friction with this other reality that is so that requires nothing of us, no doing on our part. And so my experience was of swinging between Richard, who was too small for what he'd awakened to, therefore Richard was putting into Richard's neurotic patterns or Richard's fear or Richard's worries hundreds of times more energy than he was putting into them before. Therefore they were unbearable. More than unbearable, they were overwhelming. Therefore they couldn't continue. Therefore they, in a sense, had put that into me, and then me would shatter. And then there would be a cessation of struggle and a return to bliss. And then again me would reconfigure, and then there'd be that same. So the struggle went on and on and on. And so I began to watch it very carefully. And I watched what my assumptions were. My assumption was that bliss was freedom. Unity was freedom. My assumption was that pain and fear and anxiety was imprisonment. And I started to watch both of them as objects. So that I began to make straight in the desert a highway. I began to see that the awakening process is like, it's like a circle, except it's a bigger circle than before. Before we got up into maybe higher aspects of ourself, and we descended into the lower, more petty, a little more disturbing aspects of ourselves, but not very deeply. Suddenly you get much bigger, and you can go up into truly expanded and extraordinary levels of perception, paranormal abilities, energy awareness, healing abilities, new perceptions, and then you go down into the hell realms, and the realms of real archetypal darkness that are so annihilating to our first miracle, separate self, ego consciousness. And I found that was my process. My process was one of cycling, oscillating. If you drew it as a sine curve, you would see it going up and down. And now, after this awakening, it went much, much higher and much, much lower. If you think of it as a sphere, the sphere got bigger. And if I was in my heart, if my heart would break open, then the dark and the light were integrated. They weren't in conflict with each other. But if my heart closed and I moved into my mind, then the dark and the light were antithetical and in opposition. And so I was rejecting myself, or judging myself, or attempting to be free of it. I was right back into the state that was there before the black butterfly, with all this energy, but an inadequate vehicle for that energy. And
inadequate vehicle in the sense of the structure.
well, our ego consciousness, this sense of separate self, is an inadequate vehicle for a larger perception of reality, a more complete perception of reality. And so the heart, as a center, is really, like in Chinese medicine, it's an empty vessel that is filled by spirit, by the universal source. If the heart is open, then it naturally turns everything, that energy naturally in our bodies becomes male and female, positive and negative, sodium and chloride, calcium and carbonate or sulfate, and everything. It becomes this dance of positive and negative, this dance of opposites, of polarities, and there's no conflict in that. It's all part of the expression of the one. But if there is conflict and you have a lot of energy, then it's hell. And so I experienced myself creating hell without intending to, just by re-identifying with me, which is easy to do since that's all we've ever known since we're about 3 or 4 years old, 5 years old. I guess our self-system is really intact by 5 to 6 years old. That's what I call first miracle consciousness, the self-system that makes us believe in this presumptive thing called me or I. And then suddenly along comes an energy that puts so much energy, so much more energy into me or I, and me or I can't sustain it. And so that was my experience. I don't know whether that's really addressing the question. What it meant was that I cycled. Not in mania and depression, which are abnormal forms of cycling, but between despair and elation, between desolation and consolation. And St. Thomas Aquinas talks about the spiritual process or the spiritual path as being a movement between desolation and consolation. And different individuals seem to speak about that oscillation in different ways.